That's what they do in the film world. Hello there, I'm Femi OK. This is the very last episode of Generation Why Not. We are in collaboration with Al Jazeera English and also Women Deliver, who gather together remarkable young leaders from around the world. It is a heavy title to have, remarkable young leader, Lucia Pero Pizzarosa. Hello.
Hello, Femi. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Lucia, if we wanted to get an idea of what it is that you do as a human rights lawyer, set the scene. Tell us one story that takes us into your world, your life.
All right. So just recently, so I'm pursuing a PhD in international law, and I'm working at the University of Groningen. And the PhD is a very arduous process, right? It gets very theoretical sometimes. So I was like, kind of like in a moment of conflict last year, and then I went to Uruguay to do my field work, and that kind of like reshaped or reconfigured the way that I consider my work to be. And I mean, that was fantastic because I came across this case in which I could see how all the pieces of my theoretical framework were coming together, and I could actually apply that to help somebody, to help like enable a woman to actually access the reproductive health services that she needed. And that's pretty much what I do.
All
so
right,
like,
wait. So you're glossing over the that we don't understand, that people who are not in your world don't understand. So you were able to help somebody. I don't need you to tell us her name, but tell us, how did you help somebody?
Yes, yeah.
Humble brag a little bit.
So actually, maybe I can take you a little bit back on how I decided to go into human rights field.
Tell us the story first of all, so we don't forget it.
And
tell us about how you helped her.
This is a woman, and she went to her doctor, and in Uruguay, to get an abortion procedure done, you need to fulfill a certain set of requirements. And she complied with everything, and then suddenly she was taken to court by her sexual partner, and this man pretty much was like, kind of like trying to force her to undergo an unwanted pregnancy, a pregnancy that was the kind of like the product of like a failure in contraceptive, and a pregnancy that she clearly didn't want, and it was harmful for her health. So what we did is just support her through the process. And yeah, I think that that's how I envisaged this role, trying to enable these women to make the reproductive decisions freely and responsibly.
You make it sound like it was a very smooth process. Let me tell our audience that you have lived in Uruguay, you've lived in Argentina, you've lived in Brazil, and these are places where it can be quite challenging as a woman to have your final say about what happens to you and your body. Do you want to explain that a little bit more for people who aren't familiar with Latin America?
Yeah, absolutely. So Latin America is one of the continents that have the most restrictive sexual and reproductive laws. So like out of the 6 countries that have a total prohibition on abortion, like 4 of them or 5 of them are in Latin America. So that means that effectively women have very little access to this like absolutely crucial human rights that determine their access to the whole other range of human rights. So like making informed decisions and free decisions over reproductive capacities opens like a whole different world for these women. And Latin America faces very conservative governments, very like deeply ingrained religious beliefs that also affect their access to these rights. And particularly for underprivileged women, particularly for women of color that live like in the margins, let's put it like that somehow. And in those countries that they don't have like a total prohibition or have like, for example, abstinence only sexuality education, which is already very harmful, those countries that have a legal framework that is good and can be used and is actually abiding with human rights standards, even those countries, the realization, so the implementation of those human rights is very, there are many barriers there that we need to jump over.
Let's talk about some of those barriers, because if you're involved in this work, people get very upset with you.
Yes, they do.
In a way where you could be doing something very dangerous, in the way that people are sometimes violent and aggressive towards you. I want you to be very frank and candid, Lucia. If you're involved in saying in Latin America, women should make their own choices about whether they have a child, when they have a child, if they decide not to have a child. What's your experience in terms of that pushback?
So my experience, and I'm going to be very frank here. So the moment that you speak publicly on these topics is the moment that you open the door for like a very nasty scrutiny on your life and your family. And I gave like one talk in Uruguay in March, and I received like a whole lot of emails that were not very nice. I mean, to put it.
Lucia, what do people say to you?
They say that I'm like endorsing promiscuity, and that if I open my legs and I should bear the consequences of it, and all those kind of like discourses that are very old, that have been around for a long time. And I think that they are exhaustive, and honestly, it kind of like they just reaffirm my will to continue fighting for these things. I mean, of course, I fear for my family, particularly because now they are in Uruguay. That's something to of course be aware of. But to be honest, it just reaffirms my will to continue fighting for this, because I think it's worthy, and I think this type of backlash speaks more about the people that send those emails than about our fight. So yeah, I just try and keep myself strong. Of course, that works some days. Some days I feel a bit more, yeah.
Your mum gave you some
about
advice when she heard about, well, your mother knows how polarizing these issues are, and she heard about the kind of aggressive reaction that you were getting as you were doing your work, and she gave you some advice. What did she say?
Yeah, so my mom is a fantastic woman. She's a mother of 5 and a survivor of breast cancer. So she is like just fantastic, a fantastic woman. And what she told me is like, that when people get annoyed, when people get bothered about what you're doing, because it means that you're doing something right. So that kind of like, all right, that process of like speaking truth to power and be like the annoying, be there, trying to get people to think differently and to actually embrace, that we are all dignified human beings. I mean, I feel comfortable with that role. Let's put it like that.
There is a picture that we have of you at the United Nations, and this was last year. Yeah. And you were addressing the United Nations. It was in a special session. Can you set the scene as we take a look at that picture?
Yeah, that was also very interesting. So we were invited, me and Marinela. Marinela is my fellow young leader from Croatia, to speak at this high-level panel, and it was organized by Every Woman, Every Child, which is a UN initiative that tries to like intensify the commitments that both governments, civil society organizations, and private parties do in order to achieve the development agenda and kind of like mainstreaming gender and the rights of children in the development agenda. And it was super nice because I saw that, I mean, Ban Ki-moon was there, super interesting people from different countries that are like great, like these like super important stakeholders in this thing.
All right, so here.
Sorry, feel free to interrupt me. I'm rambling.
No, I'm enjoying it. So I've sat there at the UN a few times, and tell me, as you were sitting there and they introduced you, what was going on in your head?
I mean, you can see it from the video. I was like absolutely nervous because it was my first time in the UN, my first time in the US, even my first time speaking publicly at such a high-level event. And again, English is not my first or even second or third language. So speaking in English was also...
Audience, did you just notice the way that Lucia is like, she's just casually dropped that she speaks 4 languages?
I'm sorry, that was like a very bad
Yeah. So you're a multilingual human rights young lawyer there at the United Nations, and you were genuinely nervous, or did you feel that you were bringing them some wisdom?
I like to think that I'm bringing them some wisdom, but at that point, like the moment that the microphone, it's like they open the microphone and it's my turn to say something. I mean, I think you can see that I struggle to find my voice to say my name even. Because, I mean, you're there with all these people that, I mean, at least for me, I grew up in Uruguay, right? I grew up in a 10,000 village in a suburban area of like very like deep into the countryside in Uruguay. And being at the UN and being given this opportunity to say something about my work and to say something about like, to ask questions to these people, it just like feels, surreal somehow. feel like a very big responsibility, because I'm given a space that a lot of women in Latin America are not given, and the fact that I speak English gives me access to a lot of spaces, and I take that as a responsibility.
I wanted to really connect up what it is that you do and connect it with the way that the rest of us see the world, and how we understand your job and how important your job is. And you said, I want to talk about Zika. And there was a headline that you shared with us. So we're going to put that headline up. And then you make that connection for us between your advocacy and the Zika virus, which actually has been a major issue in parts of Latin America and actually spread into other parts of the world as well. Tell us about this connection. Why is it important?
Yeah, so I think I've been researching a little bit on sexual and reproductive rights. I've been researching on sexual and reproductive rights, and I'm very familiar with Brazil. I lived there for a while. I worked for their Supreme Court. And what struck me with the Zika outbreak is that it took a public health crisis for the international community to acknowledge that there was an underlying human rights crisis existing already in Brazil and in other of the country affected, and that nobody was really paying attention. So the sexual violence that is very prevalent in the region, the lack of access to basic sexual and reproductive health services, lack of access to contraception, super restrictive abortion laws, those things were there before the Zika even appeared, right? But the thing is, like, it kind of like came to unveil that. And I think that's a very interesting phenomenon, because the UN, one of the main messages from the Zika, that came after the Zika outbreak, was like, you need to change your legal frameworks. You need to change the way you legislate about these issues, because as they exist now, they are just act as a barrier. So I think for me, that was very interesting.
So let's be honest here, because you're already used to doing a tough job, sending a tough message out there. So do you think that the Zika virus has changed the way certain Latin American countries think about what it's okay to do when we're looking at fertility, women's choice about, is it okay to go through with this pregnancy? There are some countries where that's not an option. Even when Zika, it's a big issue, they still have to go through with the pregnancy. Has Zika changed Latin America?
I'm an optimist, so I want to say yes. But the thing is that some of the structures are very, very pervasive, and they are very deeply entrenched. For example, El Salvador responded to the crisis saying oh, women, don't get pregnant. As if women were to get pregnant in the vacuum, or without engaging in any sexual intercourse, and with absolute disregard for the situation in which women are, and without giving them any real and effective means to just to not get pregnant. And at the same time, I mean, if women want to get pregnant, and women are open to take up the challenge of raising children that might suffer from any of the neural consequences of the Zika virus, then
Lucia, are lawmakers in Latin America saying, okay, I understand why we need to change the law, or will nothing ever change in Latin America?
I think it will change, because, for example, in one of the in Brazil, which is the country in which the outbreak happened for the first time, there's an action to change the abortion law that is being processed by the Supreme Court. So people got together and said okay, this is an opportunity to bring this topic to the spotlight and give the judiciary a chance to change this. And that action is is working, and the procedure is going on, and is led by these amazing women from ANIS, which is an institute that I think they are doing amazing work. And so we build step by step. Even Uruguay is it was considering, because we have one provision that only Uruguayan women can access our healthcare services. So we were trying to expand that in light of an international cooperation to provide women with a whole range of options. So yeah, I think we're moving there slowly, but the backlash is very, very strong. And I mean, the influence of the Catholic Church and conservative movements is very, very strong.
Right now, there's a huge family planning summit in the UK. It's actually wrapping up almost as we speak. If you were there, what would you tell them? What would be your message? What's your additional value that you bring to this very broad issue about women and their bodies, and also men as well?
Yeah, well, that's a really good point. So what I think that is important to stress here is that as of now, so like since we started talking about the demographic control and population control in the 60s, 70s, we've been putting the burden of childbearing, childcaring, and contraception in women. And I think that actually like contributes to a very unequal sharing, unequal distribution of the risks, of the health risks related to contraception. And I think involving men in this, because for example, again, with the Zika outbreak, women don't get pregnant. Well, there's another person involved in that process that can also take up responsibility for contraception methods. And also giving women like a wide range of options, right? I mean, the right to health means that you needs to be appropriate, needs to be adequate, needs to be available, it needs to be of high quality. So giving women the whole range, from hormonal contraception to condoms, to the incorporation of female condom, and so on and so forth. So I think these two issues of like involving men's responsibility and imagining different methods of family planning, I think is very important.
I am thinking about you as a teacher, as a leader. There's a picture that you sent us with your students, and I had to check. I wasn't sure whether it was you and your fellow students or you with my students. And I was like, wow, she's teaching other students. So this basically is an idea of how accomplished you are. So they're sitting there in a moot court. Can you explain what it is that you're doing together?
Yeah, so
and where you are?
That photo, it's lovely. So that's me, the one in the green jacket.
Yes.
And those are my students. They are all students from the International Human Rights Law or the International Public Law Masters at the University of Groningen. And we were finalists at the European Court of Human Rights Moot Court. And it was a fantastic experience because they get to actually draft a claim and to respond to that claim. So that gives them insight on how the dispute resolution mechanism works at the European Court of Human Rights and how they can use their knowledge to take a case to court, and they get to practice those skills. And it was a pleasure for me to coach them. We had a great time.
Right.
Yeah.
So from an outsider's point of view, law could be quite a dry thing. It's important, but pretty dry. And when we first talked to each other, can you remember how you described the law? Do you remember?
I don't know, like sometimes I say that it's a beautiful paper.
A gorgeous instrument. Why would you say that? Can you explain that to the rest of us? Why do you have this love of the law, and why would you say it is a gorgeous instrument, a beautiful tool for what you do?
Yeah, so I think I've always been very argumentative, so choosing to pursue a law degree was not a surprise in my family. So, but the moment I got into the law faculty, for me, it was very clear that it was very national-centered and very theoretical, right? So I started volunteering in the law clinics of my faculty, and that was like an eye-opening experience. So we were volunteering, we were providing legal aid services for people in underprivileged areas of Montevideo and some other countries, some other provinces of my country. And it was striking to me to see that 99% of the people that were coming to our law clinics were women. So then the law became very real. All these things that I've been listening to in these like lectures that can be very boring, it came to life. So I saw how the law has affected these women and how I could use it to kind of like undo and like provide for a more equal access to human rights in general. So I always felt this. So for me, the law is a tool, right? For me, the law is something that I can use to enable people to effectively access and enjoy human rights. And that's how
Sure. Give us another example of that. You told us about one case at the very beginning of our conversation. Give us another example of that, a case that you've worked on or that you're very familiar with.
Yeah. So one case that actually was life-changing for me, and I'm still in touch with that woman. So she came to the law clinics, and I was 19 years old at that point, so I was very, very young. And she came with this case in which she was in this very abusive relationship, and what she needed basically was a divorce, which is a very simple procedure, actually. But for her, our support meant that she could also explore all the other things in her life that she needed to kind of like address, right? So she came with us for a divorce, and then we ended up realizing that she has been trying to get her tubes tied, like in the healthcare system, and she was refused because she was 26 or so at that point, so she couldn't get any access to that, and that meant that she could not have any control over her reproductive capacity, and she kept getting these like unwanted pregnancies because she couldn't access contraceptive either, and she thought her husband needed to authorize that access. So she came with this like super complex story and trying to break out from the circle of like a very abusive and violent relationship. And I think I remember taking notes and going to the library and like frantically reading because I wanted to give her a solution. And that kind of like we bonded as a team after this case because it was very touching. And so we managed to give her the legal aid that she needed. And that for us as a team was a win, but also for her because it also empowered her to get more aware of her rights. And now she's raising these two beautiful children, and she's lovely, and she managed to get control of her destiny again, control of her life. She joined the workforce. That was something that she really wanted to do. Her husband wasn't allowing her to do. So for me, when I can see that the law can do things, that like gorgeous instrument that looks so nice and pretty on paper can do things for people, it's just something that it just motivates me to continue going in this direction.
Do you ever, in your line of work, do you ever get really mad? Do you get furious?
Yeah.
What are the times where you just can't keep it together? There are times when I'm doing stories as a journalist where it's so there's so much inequality, it drives me nuts, and I'm only just about keeping it together. What are those situations where you lose it?
Yeah. So I think the situation in which I thought I was just gonna call it quits, and I was really, really angry. We were at the Commission from Status of Women at the UN in 2015, and I had to sit there at one of the sessions and listen how countries like the Holy See, that has like let's not even go there. Countries like the Holy See or Nicaragua or Guatemala were saying things like, oh, family planning has never empowered any woman. Family planning promotes promiscuity. And so all these elements. And it's like, I can't believe that after 50 years of discussing this, we need to re-say or kind of like continue to prove that these things are absolutely crucial. Right? So it felt, for me, it was my first time in the UN, so I felt like actually I took a plane to the past. Instead of coming to the US, I was actually moving back in time. And that actually drives me mad because we have made so much advance. We have agreed on so many instruments. We have agreed on a sustainable development agenda that is pretty clear on how crucial these things are. There's evidence after evidence of that this works. And these people continue to say these things, right? So it's very disheartening, but at the same time, it was very empowering because I have a great photo of this. I don't know where it is, but I have it. So people from delegations, like all these men in suits, typing in their computers, and then the women's major group there with the children, because for us, this is far from theoretical. This is my life, this is my choices, my mom's choices, my sister's choices. And so you can see how one thing is like, abstract, and for others it's very concrete.
You've just finished putting together a summer school. How did that go? There's a poster here. I love the poster. Actually, the poster looks so good. I wish that I was at that summer school. Tell me about the summer school.
Thank you. It was a fantastic event, actually. So I team up with with Monica Lopez. Lopez is also fantastic. She's working also at the University of Groningen. And our idea, because when you come to the Netherlands, you get this image that is a very egalitarian society, and actually they have a really good PR team. But yeah, so what I'm trying to say here is that, so we came to this university environment, and we realized that it was much less diverse than it should, right? So it doesn't really represent the diversity in society, both in terms of representation, but also in terms of knowledge, in terms of like the books that we read, the people that we consider for certain positions, and as agents of production of knowledge and reproductive knowledge. I think we all academics have a responsibility in that regard. So we put that together, and the idea was to discuss a bit how do we go about creating a university that is engaged with societal issues, and that doesn't shy away from dealing with issues of racism, sexism, and intersectional axis.
A big issue right now for certainly young people in a lot of universities is violence, sexual violence. And this is something that you care very deeply about. Can you tell us how you're actually helping young people address this on campuses around the world?
Yeah, so we, I'm very lucky to be the coordinator of the legal research team for a campaign in my university now, and it's coordinated by a network of feminists. And what we did was like a very basic survey of how people felt on how they dealt with incidents of sexual violence, because what we see, and this is something that happens in some universities, but you can see like to a lesser or larger extent around the globe, is that there's this culture of impunity around certain things. Universities wants to protect their name. Many different reasons that kind of like make that these incidents go unaccounted for, or that doesn't really get the response that they should receive. So what we wanted to do is like to raise these issues at our university, and to, because the university is very open to listen and very open to learn, and that's something very refreshing. So we were like, okay, we have the knowledge, let's put together reports, let's work with them to develop policies on this topic, so we can actually create a more, safer, better, more creative environment, as a university should be, a transformational university, right?
Lucia, this all sounds like you have everything together. You thought it through, and you know exactly how you're going to proceed through the world. Do you ever catch yourself up where you're thinking, this is what I teach, this is what I do in my legal world, but then you're faced with a situation, and do you have all the answers when maybe somebody approaches you and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm in one of these situations that I'm teaching about, that I'm fighting about? What happens when the tables are turned?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also want to say something, because every time that I listen to somebody talking about their experiences, right, it seems like we have it all together, that our life is kind of like a puzzle that, it's kind of like all the pieces came and then suddenly you have a big picture. Well, my life hasn't been like that. So I was a corporate lawyer, and for a while I was very lost on what to do after my master's degree. But I think it's also this idea that life is not linear, and you have all these inputs that, finally they're going to all come together. But I mean, it's not us, let's put it like all us together as it seems at first sight. But I encountered many issues, and when you go to the doctor and you get asked certain questions about, it was very funny, because you go to the doctor and it's like, so are you sexually active? Yes. Is there any possibility you're pregnant? And you say no. And they kind of like, okay, this is why not? So you kind of like start questioning. It's like, oh, super heteronormative things, and very sexist approach to healthcare also, right?
One of your biographical write-ups described you as a proud Latin American feminist and women's rights activist. If anybody is watching this conversation and are thinking, I want to be just like Lucia, what would you tell them? What would be your advice?
My advice? It's always read weirdly, read widely. Because so I grew up, right, in Uruguay, and what I had available, like one of my grandmas was she was a fan of Russian authors, so I read a lot of like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and those like people that didn't really look like me, and they saw like snow coming from the skies, sky, which was very, not really going to happen in Uruguay. And so I started exploring a bit more, right? And that took me to read, I don't know, Frantz Fanon and Audre Lorde and Mel Hooks and Marcela Lagarde and all these like super amazing people that also write on the same topics. And they are just like revolutionary. And this knowledge for me has shaped the way I see the world. So go ahead and read, be weird, go explore your libraries, ask your friends, read in a language that is not yours. I think,
Lucia Berro Pizarrosa, Women Deliver Young Leader, a Latin American feminist and women's rights activist and fierce young professional, human rights lawyer. I could go on and go on and go on, but I think that's quite enough for today. Thank you very much for being our final Generation Why Not guest. Really appreciate it. Take care, Lucia.
Thank you so much, Femi. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care.